By the time Ernest Shackleton planned this expedition, Antarctica had already given up its cleanest prize. Roald Amundsen had reached the South Pole. Robert Falcon Scott had died coming back from it. That race was over, and everyone knew it. What remained was something larger, stranger, and far more dangerous, crossing the continent from one sea to the other. Shackleton understood the value of that idea at once. A man could sell it to newspapers. Sponsors could imagine it on a map. Readers could picture a line drawn across the blankest place on Earth. Glory still existed, only now it had to be longer, harsher, and more theatrical. Shackleton was not sailing south to admire ice. He was going there to claim the last great move left in the heroic age of polar exploration. Everything about the expedition began with ambition. Soon enough, ambition would become ballast, then burden, then something much heavier than any crate loaded into the hold. January 1914 brought the ship that would carry that ambition. Shackleton selected Polaris, renamed her Endurance, and tied the vessel to his family motto, "By endurance we conquer." Beneath the confidence sat a familiar expedition cocktail: money pressure, publicity pressure, prestige pressure, all bubbling together in a polished Edwardian flask. August made the timing even stranger. Europe was sliding into war just as Endurance prepared to leave. Shackleton offered the ship, the stores, and the men to the British government. The answer that came back was simple: proceed. So on August 8, 1914, the expedition left Plymouth while the 20th century was already tearing itself open somewhere beyond the horizon. That contrast matters. One world was marching into industrial slaughter. Another still believed in wooden hulls, dogs, sledges, and human nerve. Endurance sailed out carrying both eras at once, like a ghost ship launched from the wrong century at exactly the wrong moment. The long run south passed through stages of shrinking normality. South America came first. Buenos Aires followed. Then, on October 26, Endurance sailed onward towards South Georgia, a place that felt less like a destination than the final edge of the ordinary world. Grytviken was a whaling station, all smoke, iron, carcasses, and industry, which made it perfect as a border town between civilization and something colder. Here, experienced men watched ice for a living. Here, experienced men gave Shackleton bad news. The Weddell Sea was ugly that season. Pack ice was thicker than usual. Conditions looked wrong. Those warnings matter in this story, since they strip away the lazy version where disaster simply appears from nowhere. Shackleton heard the caution and kept going. That choice does not make him a fool. Neither does it make him a saint. It makes him interesting. Great survival stories usually begin with a gamble. This one announced its gamble before the real trap even appeared. On December 5, 1914, Endurance left South Georgia and sailed into the true story. 2 days later, the first pack ice appeared. That moment matters more than it first seems. Until then, the expedition still belonged to charts, schedules, and intention. After that, the environment itself became an actor with veto power. Ice in the Weddell Sea was never just scenery. It drifted, closed, crushed, separated, and waited. Shackleton still had his mission. Worsley still had his ship. The crew still had the clean shape of the plan in their heads. Yet the terms were already changing. Every mile south now carried a hidden cost. Progress came slower. Choices narrowed. Distance stopped meaning control. That is the engine of the whole film. Endurance does not plunge instantly into catastrophe. Instead, the expedition crosses an invisible line where success remains visible ahead, while failure begins moving under the surface like something alive beneath dark water. Early in January 1915, Antarctica finally showed itself. After weeks of sea, fog, distance, and rumor, the coast appeared ahead like proof that the original plan still had a pulse. That mattered more than the land itself. A visible shoreline meant the crossing had not yet become fantasy. Men could still imagine unloading stores, setting camp, and beginning the overland march that justified the whole voyage. Hope, in this chapter, becomes dangerous exactly because it stays visible. Shackleton is close enough to taste success and far enough away to lose it. That is the real poison in this section. Failure does not arrive as a single blow. Disaster hangs just offshore, pretending to be delay. Every mile south now carries a hidden fee. Each opening in the ice can close again. Every glimpse of the continent makes the trap harsher, since the prize is near enough to haunt them and far enough to remain out of reach. By January the 15th and 16th, Endurance had pushed to within roughly 200 nautical miles of Vassal Bay. That number should be used like a knife. They were not wandering blindly in the outer dark anymore. They were close. The bay, the landing, the beginning of the crossing, all of it sat just ahead on the chart while the Weddell Sea quietly thickened around them. Heavy pack ice turned distance into insult. A weak version of this story says the expedition failed out in some vague white nowhere. The better version is crueler. They came near enough to the continent for the plan to feel real, then watched the route harden shut. This beat must feel like a hallway narrowing 1 foot at a time. Navigation still exists. Choice still exists. Progress still appears possible. Yet the terms are changing faster than the men can admit. Shackleton has not lost the expedition yet. The ice has merely started editing it without asking permission. January 18, 1915 is the date when the story actually begins. Endurance becomes beset in the pack, fixed in place at about 76 degrees 34 minutes south. No sinking. No cinematic snap. No grand crash. Motion simply ends. That stillness is the true inciting incident. A ship can survive damage. A mission can survive delay. Agency is harder to replace once it is gone. From this point forward, the expedition is no longer driving south toward a goal. The expedition is being held. That change sounds subtle on paper, though it hits like a hammer in a script. The vessel remains upright. The men still eat on schedule. Orders are still given. None of that changes the central fact. The environment now has veto power over every plan on board. This is where your narration should tighten. Shackleton is no longer leading an expedition across Antarctica. He is commanding a group inside a prison that floats and shifts and groans around them. Late January brings the first great humiliation of the voyage: routine. Once the ship stops moving, life has to keep moving anyway. Floors get scrubbed. Meals are served. Dogs are managed. Gear is checked. Men work, joke, complain, and pretend that ordinary habits still mean ordinary circumstances. That is not filler. That is survival doctrine. Your dossier is dead right here. The ship becomes a winter station rather than a vehicle, and morale engineering begins long before the famous rescue phase. Shackleton understands something many adventure stories flatten into mush. Boredom is a threat. Idleness breeds resentment. Resentment corrodes obedience. Structure, by contrast, keeps fear from becoming the only thing in the room. So the routines matter. Chores matter. Small rituals matter. Endurance is frozen in place, yet the men are forced to act like movement still exists in some other form. They are not traveling now. They are managing the psychological shock of stop time. February delivers one last bitter lesson before the drift takes over completely. The crew tries to cut a channel to open water, hacking toward a lead ahead, and the ice answers with the polar version of a laugh. Nothing gives enough. Nothing opens enough. Human effort is visible, honest, exhausting, and basically useless against the scale of the thing holding them. A few days later, on February 22nd, they reach their furthest south, around 77 degrees, and then the cruel reversal lands. After that, the drift north begins. That turn is perfect retention fuel. Even their best geographic milestone becomes proof that control has already slipped away. From March into April, the drift itself becomes the plot. They move without choosing. They advance without advancing. The map still changes, but no one on board is really steering the story anymore. That belongs to the ice now, and the men are only beginning to understand how long its patience can last. June 1915 brings the kind of cold that changes the meaning of ordinary time. Days no longer move by distance covered or landmarks passed. Hours are measured in watches, meals, chores, darkness, and the small rituals that keep a trapped crew from drifting inward. Midwinter is celebrated with food, ceremony, and deliberate cheer, which matters far more than it sounds. A feast in that place is not luxury. A feast is strategy. Shackleton understands that morale is now a survival resource, just like fuel or flour. The ship remains intact enough to live in, though its function has already changed. Endurance is no longer a vehicle carrying men toward a destination. She is a floating enclosure holding 28 men in one place while the season closes around them. That is the tonal shift this chapter needs. The expedition has not reached open disaster yet. Instead, it has entered confinement, where boredom, irritation, and fear begin doing the slow work that hunger and cold will finish later. Routine keeps the lid on panic, yet routine also creates its own poison. Shackleton's equality policy means gentlemen, officers, scientists, and seamen all share unpleasant work, and that grates on men raised to think class is as natural as weather. Diary friction starts to matter here, since it keeps the story human instead of sainted. Some resent the chores. Others resent the resentful men. Everyone is trapped with everyone else, which makes fairness both essential and abrasive. Shackleton's genius in this phase is less heroic than managerial. He is allocating discomfort before discomfort allocates itself. Jobs are assigned. Music gets played. Games happen. Small ceremonies stand in for motion. Boredom is treated like an infection that must be cut out before it reaches the brain of the group. By late winter, the ice begins sounding different. Pops echo through the dark. Sharp cracks fire out like rifle shots. Grinding pressure rolls under the hull with the ugly patience of machinery too large to see all at once. This is a perfect horror beat, since the threat arrives through noise before it arrives through ruin. Men learn to read leads, ridges, and weather the way sailors elsewhere read tide and sail. Knowledge helps, though knowledge also sharpens dread. A man who understands pack ice does not feel calmer when he hears it moving. He feels informed about his danger. Endurance still floats. Shelter still exists. Food still reaches the table. None of that means the ship is safe. Compression in the Weddell Sea is not a dramatic one-night storm. Pressure is cumulative, methodical, and patient. That patience makes the whole thing worse. Nature is not charging at them. Nature is tightening one invisible turn at a time, while the men lie awake listening to the structure hold for now. September removes any remaining illusion that the ship is merely stuck. Pressure events now lift and torque endurance in ways the crew can feel through their boots and hear through the beams. This is where the prison starts showing teeth. Earlier, immobilization stole agency. Now the environment begins attacking shelter itself. Hurley's images matter enormously here, since they let viewers see what narration alone can only describe. A vessel wedged inside a landscape that does not merely surround it but actively works upon it. Fear changes shape in this beat. Before, the men worried the expedition might fail. After these pressure episodes, they start worrying the ship may die before they can invent a second plan. Shackleton's role changes with that realization. He is no longer preserving a mission with some survival contingencies attached. He is preserving people while the mission rots in public view. That transition is the beating heart of the story, and this is the chapter where the audience has to feel it landing hard. A trapped ship can still function as hope until the crew understands it may not survive the next cycle of pressure. That realization arrives in September 1915, and it is one of the true turning points in the whole expedition. Shackleton begins thinking in lifeboats rather than landing parties. Escape replaces crossing as the shape of the future. Planning itself mutates. Supplies are no longer just expedition stores. Boats are no longer just auxiliary craft. Every object on board starts being judged by a colder question: would this matter if the ship vanished under us? That is an astonishing shift when you slow down and look at it. The men are still aboard. Meals still happen. Watches still rotate. Even so, the leadership problem has changed completely. Shackleton is now preparing his crew for the death of their world without saying the whole sentence at full volume. That is the cliff edge for this chapter. Next comes the moment when the prison stops pretending it can remain a home. October 27, 1915 is the day Shackleton stops pretending the ship might still carry them back into the old story. Endurance is abandoned. Every man is told to cut his personal belongings down to 2 pounds, which turns survival into a brutal little math problem where sentiment suddenly has weight. Letters, keepsakes, extra clothes, private comforts, all of it has to face the knife. Hurley's glass plates are saved in part, then the rest are smashed so nobody can keep reaching backward for things that can no longer matter. Huss's banjo stays too, saved as medicine for morale rather than music for leisure. That detail earns its place. A stranded group does not live on calories alone. Shackleton understands that shelter may already be dying, while spirit cannot be allowed to die first. This moment should feel like a family fleeing a house that is still standing, knowing the walls behind them are already lost. Leaving the ship does not bring relief. Cruelty enters through delay instead. Endurance remains there, upright enough to haunt them, damaged enough to terrify them, familiar enough to feel like a home being executed in slow motion. Men camp on the floe beside the wreck and watch the thing that protected them continue to suffer without quite finishing the job. That lag matters enormously for retention. An instant sinking would close the beat. A lingering death keeps the wound open. 2 days later, another savage decision follows. Weak dogs are shot, and Mrs. Chippy is killed as well, deepening resentment around McNish and hardening the emotional weather inside the party. Nothing about this phase is cinematic in the cheap way. No grand speeches save it. No stirring music redeems it. The expedition has become a homeless camp park next to its own dying architecture, which is a nasty, memorable shape for a chapter. Late October brings Ocean Camp, and the name itself sounds like someone trying to civilize disaster with a pen stroke. Tents go up on the floe. Stores are arranged. Watches continue. Meals still happen. None of that changes the deeper truth. These men are now living on a moving platform above black water with no fixed route, no radio reach, and no certainty that the surface under them will survive the season. Shackleton gives the nearest workable refuge as Powlett Island, roughly 346 miles away, which is exactly the kind of number that should land hard in narration. It is close enough to sound possible. It is far enough to feel absurd once boats, sledges, pressure ridges, and exhaustion enter the frame. Ocean Camp is where the story becomes brutally honest about scale. The dream of crossing Antarctica is dead. Survival has replaced achievement, and even survival still sits far beyond any distance a tired man can simply walk. From October 30th into early November, they try to march. Boats, sledges, stores, and human bodies all get dragged across tortured ice that refuses to behave like land. Progress is pathetic. Miles cost too much. Pressure ridges turn straight lines into a joke. Men strain, slip, curse, and spend energy at a rate that terrifies any leader capable of counting. Shackleton sees the truth before pride can kill them with it. The march is abandoned. That decision is one of the sharpest leadership beats in the story, since it looks passive and is actually ruthless realism. Waiting now becomes action. Drifting becomes strategy. Progress is redefined as staying alive long enough for the environment to change its terms. A bad move kills them faster than cold ever could. Sometimes wisdom looks an awful lot like surrender until the bodies are counted later. On November 8th, Hurley returns to the flooded wreck to recover more plates, a mad little salvage mission carried out inside the corpse of the expedition. 13 days later, on November 21st, Endurance finally goes down. Worsley records the position with the precision of a man measuring the depth of more than timber and iron, about 68 degrees 39 minutes south, 52 degrees 26 minutes west. That detail gives the moment weight. A vanished ship becomes a point on the map, which is somehow colder than grief by itself. After the sinking, everything is stripped bare. No vessel remains. No wireless remains. No fixed shelter remains. One winter of ambition has become a drifting camp on sea ice with boats, ration tins, tools, and a leadership problem large enough to swallow every waking hour. Chapter 4 should end there, with the cleanest fact in the whole ordeal. Now they are truly alone, and the ice under them is still moving. November fades into December, and survival loses whatever romance weak minds try to glue onto it. Fresh meat becomes the center of life now, with seal and penguin replacing the precious sledging rations they cannot afford to burn early. Hunger is no longer a future threat stalking the horizon. It sits beside them at every meal, forcing arithmetic onto every scrap of flour, every biscuit, every ounce of pemmican they still hope to save for something worse. Ocean camp meanwhile starts shrinking in a more literal sense. Cracks open. Edges soften. The floe itself begins to decompose under their feet, which means even waiting has become dangerous. Shackleton's genius in this phase lies in recognizing that drift is not laziness. Drift is policy. A bad march could murder them faster than the cold, while patience, ugly as it looks, gives the ice time to carry them toward a chance no man can manufacture by force. Late December brings another attempt to move, and once again the ice humiliates them. Boats snag on ridges. Sledges fight every yard. Men pour strength into labor that produces almost nothing worth calling progress. Shackleton watches the numbers, the pace, the exhaustion, then makes the coldest smart choice in the story so far: stop. Patience Camp is born from that decision, and the name matters. There is no swagger in it. There is no fake courage either. A lesser leader might have kept marching to preserve appearances, since motion looks brave while waiting looks weak. Shackleton chooses the option that protects bodies instead of ego. From here onward, the camp becomes a floating compromise between despair and discipline. Everyone knows they are still stranded. Nobody knows when the platform beneath them will break. All they can do is eat, mend, watch, count, and trust that doing less today will allow them to do the only thing that matters later. Patience Camp turns boring calories into suspense. Flour matters. Pemmican matters. Tiny margins in the food ledger matter more than heroics, speeches, or dreams of headlines back home. Meals become repetitive enough to numb the mind, yet that monotony keeps men alive. Seal and penguin do one essential favor by helping ward off scurvy, though the cure comes wrapped in grease, blood, stink, and exhaustion from eating the same creatures day after day. Variety disappears. Appetite becomes work. Gratitude mixes with disgust at every firelit meal. The kitchen itself looks like survival built by a committee of shipwreck mechanics, a stove made from old oil drums, blubber smoke fouling the air, soot crawling over clothes and faces until the men begin to resemble the place keeping them alive. This section should feel tactile and filthy. Leadership here is no grand performance. Leadership here is keeping a group functional inside smoke, repetition, bad sleep, and the slow insult of knowing that dinner tomorrow will probably taste exactly like dinner tonight. While most of the party fights the body-level misery of camp life, Frank Worsley keeps fighting a more abstract enemy, uncertainty. Every sun's sight matters now. Every patch of clear sky offers one narrow chance to learn where the flow is carrying them and whether drift is helping, hurting, or merely rearranging the shape of the coming disaster. Coordinates are less important than the emotional fact behind them. Worsley is turning chaos into information, and information is one of the few luxuries left on the ice. February adds another hard labor beat when men go back to retrieve the third boat, the Stancomb Wills, from Ocean Camp. That mission feels ridiculous and necessary at once. They haul, strain, return, and are met with hot tea, one of those tiny details that lands hard precisely because comfort has become microscopic. A cup of something warm can feel like civilization when civilization itself has vanished. By late February and March 1916, the sea ice starts lying to them, Solid ground remains underfoot, though only in the way a cracked roof remains above your bed right before a storm finishes the job. Leads open. Thin skins of new ice form. Dark water shows itself, disappears, then returns somewhere else like the whole surface is breathing against them. Men begin listening harder than before, since every sound might be warning. Every crack becomes a countdown. Every shift in the flow threatens to force the next phase before anyone feels ready for it. Patience Camp is no longer just a camp. Patience Camp is a launch pad nobody wants to use. The ice has carried them as far as it can. Soon it will stop behaving like land at all, and when that moment comes, the 3 lifeboats will become the only world they have left. April 9, 1916 is the day the floor finally quits pretending to be land. Patience Camp breaks apart, dark water opens, and the 3 lifeboats that had spent months as insurance suddenly become the entire future of the expedition. Shackleton has no elegant option left now. James Caird, Dudley Docker, and Stancomb Wills go into the water, loaded with men who are weak, filthy, smoke-blackened, and far more exhausted than a normal boat journey would ever allow. Every previous chapter has been tightening toward this point. First the ship stopped moving. Later the ship died. Then the camp became a waiting room on cracking ice. Now even waiting is over. Launching looks like action, though it is really forced motion under threat of immediate death. That distinction matters. Nobody is choosing adventure here. The environment has revoked the last stable platform they had and shoved them into open water with whatever strength, skill, and luck remains. Open boat survival strips the story down to pain, spray, and direction. Waves hit hard. Wind punishes small errors. Salt water soaks clothing that has no chance to dry, while freezing air turns that wetness into a slow weapon laid directly on skin. Men row, steer, bail, and endure a rhythm that offers almost no relief, only shifts in discomfort. Shackleton aims for the nearest land that exists, which is a phrase that tells you everything about their condition. They are no longer trying to reach a good destination. They are trying to reach any destination before exposure and exhaustion start taking men away one by one. Boats separate and reconnect in bad conditions. Sleep becomes a crude interruption rather than rest. Hope survives, though it has grown smaller and uglier than before. The continent they once meant to cross has vanished from the plot. A scrap of shore, any scrap at all, is enough now to feel like victory. April 15th brings one of the sharpest emotional reversals in the entire expedition. Elephant Island appears, the boats reach shore, and for a few stunned moments the men have what they have lacked for 497 days, solid ground. Shackleton gives the honor of first landing to Pierce Blackborough, the youngest among them and the stowaway who had become one of the expedition's clearest symbols of physical cost. Relief hits first. Reality arrives right behind it. This island is uninhabited, barren, lashed by weather, and nowhere near normal shipping routes. Land exists, yet rescue still does not. Elephant Island is not an ending. Elephant Island is a pause where the men can finally stop drifting long enough to understand how badly stranded they still are. 2 days later the party shifts to a safer place on the north coast, Point Wild, where some shelter from surf and rockfall can be improvised. Shelter is the key word there, since comfort is nowhere in sight. 2 overturned boats become a roof. Stones, canvas, and exhausted labor turn the site into a bunker rather than a camp, and that change in feel should guide the narration. This is no longer a moving survival story. This is static horror. Men are wet, weak, short on margins, and staring at another winter with no guarantee that help will ever appear. Your dossier is absolutely right to flag this section as dangerous for pacing if written lazily. The fix is escalation. Cold becomes claustrophobia. Hunger becomes routine. Waiting becomes psychological warfare. Most important of all, Shackleton now sees the next truth with brutal clarity: staying together on this beach means dying slowly. Somebody will have to leave, and the only available road runs straight into the Southern Ocean. April 1916 leaves Shackleton with the kind of choice that barely deserves the word choice at all. Stay on Elephant Island, and the men wait for death to arrive politely through hunger, exposure, or another Antarctic winter. Leave, and 6 men gamble everything on a 22-foot lifeboat that was never meant for this kind of ocean. McNish turns that boat into something just barely more credible. He raises the gunwales, adds a rough deck, seals seams with improvised materials, and gives the James Caird a chance to survive water that would happily erase all 6 men in an afternoon. Shackleton selects Worsley, Crean, McNish, McCarthy, and Vincent. That list matters, since each choice carries a function: navigation, endurance, seamanship, raw labor. Nothing here is romantic if you tell it correctly. This is ugly engineering attached to colder logic. Somebody must go. Everybody knows the boat is too small. Everybody also knows it is the only road left. On April 24, 1916, the James Caird leaves Elephant Island and carries the only real rescue plan into fog, swell, and distance. Men on shore watch their future shrink into weather. Wild remains behind with instructions that reveal how grim Shackleton's thinking has become. If the boat fails, the stranded party may need to attempt escape in spring on its own. That detail keeps the chapter honest. This is not a glorious breakout. This is a partition of risk. One group gets the ocean. Another group gets the waiting. Both branches can still end badly. The voyage itself begins in watches, labor, spray, and relentless discomfort. One man steers. Another trims sail. Somebody bails. Everybody suffers. Sleep arrives in miserable fragments rather than proper rest. Every mile gained is paid for with wet cold, cramped limbs, and the knowledge that a single bad storm can end the entire expedition without leaving much behind except wreckage and names. The real drama of this passage is navigation, though it has to be written like suspense rather than homework. Worsley is trying to hit South Georgia, a small target in a savage ocean, from a boat so tiny that margin for error barely exists. Clouds rob him of sights. Spray freezes on the craft. Water keeps getting inside. Bodies keep weakening. Then, whenever the sun breaks through, he gets one brief chance to learn whether they are still in the game or already dead on a longer schedule. Technical detail only matters when it sharpens dread. Worsley is not drawing pretty charts. He is converting moments of light into survival. Meanwhile, Shackleton keeps the boat functioning through sheer pressure management, deciding rationing, labor, and morale while the Southern Ocean works every seam and every nerve. 17 days in that environment do not feel heroic from the inside. They feel wet, sleepless, bruised, and frighteningly temporary. South Georgia finally appears in May 1916, which sounds like deliverance until geography adds one more insult. The James Caird reaches the island's southern side, not the whaling stations on the safer northern coast where help actually exists. Land has been found. Rescue still has not. That reversal is exactly why this story keeps retaining when the structure is handled right. Survival keeps arriving in damaged forms. 3 men are left with the boat. Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean prepare to cross mountains and glacier that have no map waiting to guide them. Once again, the story changes shape at the exact moment viewers think they understand it. Sea survival becomes mountain survival. Relief becomes another test. Safety remains visible while staying stubbornly out of reach. After 17 days in a 22-foot boat, they still are not home, and the hardest landfall of the expedition may still be ahead. May 18, 1916 brings the last transformation of the story. Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean leave the southern coast of South Georgia and head inland with no proper map, little rest, inadequate gear, and no safe margin for failure. Mountains replace waves. Glacier replace spray. Exhaustion stays exactly where it was. The crossing works so well in a script because it feels impossible in a fresh way. After 17 days in the James Caird, viewers expect land to mean safety. South Georgia refuses that bargain. Relief exists, though it sits on the far side of terrain these men do not understand. They push continuously, cutting across ridges and dropping down slopes in a single grinding effort until Stromness finally appears on May 20th. Civilization does not arrive like comfort. Civilization hits them like disbelief. 3 wrecked men walk out of the mountains looking less like victors than survivors who have reached the next room before the building collapses. Reaching Stromness solves only one branch of the emergency. 22 men remain trapped on Elephant Island. The fix is simple and nasty. Treat each one as hope returning, then getting beaten flat by reality. Southern Sky goes first and fails when pack ice blocks the approach. Uruguayan help follows with Instituto de Pesca No. 1, then Emma enters the sequence, and that attempt fails too under the combined weight of ice, machinery, weather, and timing. Shackleton is no longer surviving in the field. He is surviving inside frustration. Every failed effort increases the burden on Frank Wild, who has to keep his men functioning on Elephant Island while their only rescuer keeps disappearing into the same white refusal. The final attempt leaves on August 25, 1916 aboard the Chilean tug Yelcho, with Luis Pardo commanding a vessel that looks far too modest for the job history is about to demand from it. 5 days later, on August 30th, the black dot appears off Elephant Island and slowly becomes a ship. That visual matters. After months of drift, camp life, hunger, smoke, frostbite, surgery, and doubt, rescue arrives first as a speck no larger than false hope. Then the shape holds. Then the miracle becomes mechanical fact. Shackleton's first question is the right one: are you all well? The answer gives the story its famous ending. Every one of the 22 men left with Wild is still alive. Cigarettes are thrown ashore. Chaos becomes relief. The Weddell Sea Party has survived the ordeal intact, and the emotional payoff lands hardest when the narration resists the urge to scream over it. Facts are loud enough here already. Now comes the correction that keeps the ending strong instead of mushy. Shackleton did not achieve the expedition's original goal. Antarctica was never crossed. Endurance was lost. Warnings about Weddell Sea ice had been real. Newer scholarship also argues the ship may have been less structurally suited to extreme compressive ice than later legend liked to claim. Great leadership still lives inside those facts. It simply lives there honestly. Another myth needs cleaning too. The famous hazardous journey recruitment ad remains unproven, and the no deaths line applies to the Weddell Sea Party rather than the whole Imperial Trans-Antarctic expedition, whose Ross Sea branch suffered fatalities. That truth does not weaken the story. It improves it. Shackleton's real achievement was not perfection. His real achievement was adaptation. He failed as an explorer in the narrow sense, then became extraordinary when the plan died and only people remained. That is why the story lasts.